Hi everybody! So if you follow me on Facebook, then you know that I actually cut my hair. I did too much experimentation with different products and different types of conditioners over the last 6 months or so, and nothing really worked as well as my kind of tried and true regimen that I had mentioned last year with my L'Oreal conditioner. So I got about 5 or 6 inches cut off, not as much as I was expecting to. I was actually expecting at least like 7, maybe even 8 inches cut off, but I was able to salvage most of it just by doing like a really deep conditioning treatment. So here are my clean, healthy ends, yay! But it was actually a good thing that I did this because I wasn't really in love with my hair for a while, and now that I cut it and I have, you know, fresh, new, pretty ends, and my hair behaves a whole lot better and it's just easier to maintain now, and I'm in love with my hair again, so it actually turned out for the best. Now that the ends of my hair are all pretty and nice again, I need to actually do some cleaning up of some of the shorter hairs along the length of this, and I usually do this with the search and destroy method. So search and destroy, there are a ton of videos on it, but some people had asked me to do a video on mine because, you know, I do it too. So what the search and destroy method is, basically you only cut the hairs that are split and you leave the healthy hairs alone. And you do this, you know, 1 at a time or 2 at a time. So it's not that difficult, but it can be time consuming and laborious. But the trade-off here is that you preserve a lot of your length. If you actually have the time to do this, then by all means do so. You can just keep a pair of hair shears by your sofa, also have a towel so that you don't get little hairs all over yourself or the surface that you're sitting on. And you can just search and destroy while you're watching TV or a movie. You can also keep it by your desk, so if you're watching YouTube videos, and you can also do some search and destroy while you're doing that as well. And if you only have a few split ends, then this is a really good method because, you know, you don't have to cut off 100,000 hairs if you only have maybe 50 or 100 that are split. However, if you look at the ends of your hair and you can see that, say, like 1 out of every 3 hairs are actually split, just get a trim. It's a whole lot easier. The search and destroy method is particularly useful on little shorter hairs, and contrary to what some women would like you to believe, nobody's hair is all the same length if they have longer hair. Maybe if they have a buzz cut or something, but not if they have longer hair such as myself, because not everybody's hair follicles are all in the same cycle at the same time. So if you have a little follicle that had gone through telogen and then started up their anagen later than their other hairs, and obviously that hair is going to be newer, younger, and obviously shorter. So you can't have shorter hairs that are also healthy. However, these little baby hairs, they can also break, they can also become damaged or split. And yes, there are some shorter hairs that are a result of broken hair, especially if you do a lot of styling. So those hairs can split or break off, and you need to maintain those little shorter hairs so that you can get rid of those split ends as well. And so if I see a few hairs that are, say, at shoulder length or armpit length and they need some trimming, I'm not going to trim all my hair off at shoulder length just to get rid of those few. It makes a lot more sense to me to just take a pair of hair shears, hunt out those hairs individually, and just cut them off above the point of the damage. So the things that you're going to need for a search and destroy method are obviously a good pair of hair shears. Now, the hair shears that I had used in my trimming my own hair video, those actually were hair shears. They weren't like Crayola or some sort of craft scissors. Even though they had the plastic handle, they were still hair shears. I don't know why some people were saying that I was using the wrong scissors for it, but those were rather blunt. So I finally invested in my own, and I don't let anybody use it except for myself. So I use this exclusively for cutting my hair, for nothing else. And do not use any sort of fabric scissors or shears, or don't use any craft scissors, because having your hair cut with blunt blades can actually create more splits and more damage later. Another thing that you need is a towel, once again, to catch all the very short hairs that are falling when you're doing this method, because if you get it all over your couch, that's not fun. Practice or experiment with different colors of towels or sheets or papers underneath your hair, because even though I'm showing up a light one just to show you the contrast against the camera, I actually see the damage in my hair better if I put it up against a dark or a black background, like a black carpet or something. Even though my hair hair is dark, damage shows up as being slightly lighter, and I can very easily point out the splits or the little start of damage, you know, those little white spots, if I can see it up against a darker background. And obviously, I hope it goes without saying that you need good lighting for this, because if you can't see what you're doing, you're probably not getting all the damage or actually cutting off some healthy hairs. So if you do the search and destroy method pretty much exclusively and you never get a blunt cut, you will end up with what some people call fairy tale ends, which is basically when it's very thin and wispy at the bottom. I prefer my hair to have the blunt cut. What I was kind of sporting before this was the fairy tale ends, because I was trying to search and destroy and maintain as much as possible. However, it just got to the point that I just needed to cut it. So, but if you like the fairy tale ends, then by all means you are allowed to search and destroy exclusively and not actually get blunt trims or cuts. It's your hair, you know, do what you want to do. I find a split end like this. I cut it off at about 1/8 of an inch above the point of the split, or above the point of the damage. So 1/8 of an inch in metric is about 3 millimeters. And I just cut it a little bit above the damage, not right at the point of the damage, just to make sure that I got it all, because sometimes you see the visible split, but you don't see the damage that's kind of forming above that, because, you know, the split kind of widens or gets longer over time, and sometimes you don't see that damage actually starting. So I start a little bit above. If you want to cut the damaged hair 1/4 of an inch or even 1/2 an inch above the point of the damage, that's your prerogative. I find that cutting 1/8 of an inch or about 3 millimeters above is fine for me. I was hoping that this would actually show up on camera, but I think that my lens doesn't have like enough of a macro setting to show you this split in very fine detail. But the end of my hair kind of is right there, and the split starts about 5 millimeters up, and so I'm just going to go a little bit above that and cut it off. And obviously that took a whole lot longer than I would normally if I weren't talking and trying to explain. So what kind of splits should you be looking for? What kind of damage should you be looking for? Basically regular splits like that. If it's very frayed and very frazzled or feathered at the end, then cut that off. If you have any hairs that are even thinner, then you can cut off the thin part of it. It should basically be the same width of the hair going all the way through. So for instance, this one here, I can see that it's thin. And so what might have actually happened is it was split before, and then 1/2 of the split just broke off, and so it's just thin at the end. And so just cut it off above the point of that damage there, so that the entire hair is kind of the same thickness. Also, oh, right here is the perfect example of a bent end right there. And you want to cut it off above the point of the bent area, because what the bent area is, it might be the start of sort of like a loop, like a split that starts in the middle of the hair, especially if it's like an acute angle, you know, like less than 90 degrees. It's very dramatically bent. Just cut it off above that point of the damage as well. White spots, or just like kind of crunchy, weird feeling or weird looking ends that are kind of like all squiggly. Basically anything that doesn't look normal, just cut it off. And sometimes also, if you look really closely at some bent areas here, for instance, it's actually not just the hair bending, but that's actually a knot right there. That's a single strand knot, also sometimes known as a fairy knot. And so you want to cut those off, because there's no way for you to take a pin and get those knots out. And even if it did, the hair is probably curled around itself so much that it's created damage to the cuticle anyways, just by being bent that much. So you can just go ahead and cut that off. Sometimes you can't see those fairy knots if your hair is quite fine, but you can feel it, because when you're rubbing your finger over your hair, then you can feel the little bump on there where the knots formed. Now, if you have that kind of beaded hair, I believe it's a kind of genetic variation that some people actually have sort of beaded hair, where the thickness of the hair is not the same all the way through. Then obviously disregard that. But if you look at some other girls' videos doing this on YouTube, you'll see some other methods, such as the girls will curve it over their hair like that, or curve it over their finger, so that when they see the damaged end kind of pop up like that, then they can just cut it off. And they can continue doing that, and they'll systematically section off their hair and do a little bit at a time. Some other methods that I have actually tried as well is twisting little sections of your hair just spiraling it, keep twisting, 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 and any little damaged hairs that pop out of the spiral, you can trim those off. Actually, what I like to do is to braid my hair, and at the end of the day, if I see any little damaged hairs that are kind of splaying out of my braid, then I'll go ahead and cut off the damage there. If you do mini braids, I do that maybe once every couple of years, I find it very useful that before I actually pick out the braids at the end of a couple of weeks, I will go through and cut off all the damaged ends that way, because since they're really small braids, then it basically, I guess, sort of increases the surface area of the damaged ends poking out, and so you can get more of them that way as opposed to just getting the few that poke out of a very large braid. But really, there is no right and wrong way to do it. Whatever is most comfortable for you, just experiment with it. And basically how often you should do this, it's basically as needed. So some people do this a little bit every day. They'll just, cut off maybe 100 damaged hairs every day when they're, watching their YouTube videos or TV. Some people like to do it once a month at a specific time, and some people never search and destroy. It's completely up to you once again. So if you search and destroy, then let me know in the comments down below or in a video response. I'd be very interested to know how you guys do this, if you do it the same or differently. And I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!